Hello and welcome to this chess sacrifice video, which is a game review. This game was recommended by a viewer, and it features Bent Larsen playing with the white pieces versus Efim Geller, and this game is from 1960. And the end of this game has some interesting sacrifices and attacks. So let's check it out, see what we can learn. I kind of enlarged my image to cover everything up over here in case you want to guess the moves as we go along. So Bent Larsen begins with G3 here. Interesting choice. It doesn't directly cover the center, which you usually want to do in the opening. But it allows him to fianchetto a bishop, and that bishop will attack the center, and aim all the way up towards the rook. And you'll notice that in this game and many other games by great players, they will aim pieces, less valuable pieces, at the more valuable pieces. So the rook will be, the bishop will be aimed at the rook in the future. Queen may aim at a king, or a rook or other piece may aim at the queen. All right, moving on. We have D5, the response. And what do you think Larsen will do? Well, he continues with his plan of fianchettoing here. And then we have E5 by Efim Geller. So both of these players were grandmasters and some of the best players in the time in 1960. So here, if your opponent lets you control the center, why not push these pawns out in the center to control, all these squares in the middle of the board? Okay, knight to F3 is played. Now, this opening is called the King's Fianchetto opening, but it'll transpose into a ready opening, into a King's Indian attack. And a lot of times in the King's Indian attack, you'll just fianchetto the bishop, bring the knight up, push this pawn to D3, and it'll be kind of like the King's Indian defense that you play with black, where you do the same thing. All right. Larsen's opponent just begins the development of his pieces, and now we have castling. So already, Bent Larsen has his king safe, his rook is moved closer to the center. He has pretty much 3 pieces developed, maybe 2.5, because this rook is closer to the center, but it's kind of closed in. But he does have a lead in development. So Geller is trying to catch up by developing his pieces, bringing the knights out first as they are slower than the bishops. And the game continues with C4. Now, you'll see this often where the C pawn will move out and attack the more valuable central pawn. Either with black or white, you can do this. And black has to make a decision here. Does he ignore this? If he does, the pawn could capture this more valuable central pawn. And if the knight captures, well then, maybe this pawn could chase the knight. The knight could develop and put pressure on the knight. So, do you ignore it? Do you go ahead and capture, pulling your more valuable pawn away from the center? Or should you just push forward and avoid the trade? So Larsen, his opponent, Geller, pushes forward, gaining space in the center. And now we have D3 blocking any further movement of that pawn, and also allowing this bishop to develop in the future. So the game continues with more pieces being developed. And now, maybe you didn't guess this move, or did I play it too fast and didn't give you time to guess? But this move, is it good or bad? Generally, you don't want to move a knight on the rim. Knights on the rim are dim, is the old saying. Computer says this is an inaccuracy, that E3 would have been better. and that e3 would leave the game dead even. Now here, what could black do? If black captures, it would give up the bishop pair, but it would give up his bad bishop, which is blocked by these central pawns. It would also wreck the pawn structure over here on the queen side, but he doesn't do that. He plays the best move according to the computer, just castling the king to safety. And now, what should Larsen do here? Well, he just slides the rook over, maybe intending to push this pawn forward in the future, and it would be backed up by the rook. Or if the bishop does decide to capture, then he would have a rook on a half-open file there. So the game continues with rook centralizing. And now what do you think Larsen will do here? And at the moment, the computer is giving black a slight edge here, about a half a pawn edge in the computer's estimate or calculation. So knight retreats, dropping back and towards the center with that knight, no longer giving his opponent the chance to trade off there. But the computer, I don't think, recommends that. Let me see. No, the computer doesn't even recommend taking that knight. So we were back to this position. Now, Efim Geller, he starts pushing a pawn on the queen side, and the computer gives that move a star, saying it's the best move. At this point, black is maintaining an edge, an even bigger 0.7, so over half a pawn equivalent advantage, even though material's equal. What does Larsen do now? And in the comment left by my viewer who recommended this game, I believe he stated that Larsen felt this was his best or one of his best games, and we'll see why at the end. It gets quite interesting, so hopefully you stick around and check that out. All right, computer says this was the best move. Pushing forward here, fortifying the c-pawn, maybe slowing this advance down. And we have h6, giving the king some breathing room in case it has to run off of the back rank, also preventing the knight or the bishop from moving forward here to g5. So how does Larsen respond? Well, he goes ahead and pushes forward here, maybe with the idea to get these queenside pawns moving, also to keep pieces out of b4 perhaps. So now we have bishop developing to f5, lining up on the more valuable rook. And that's what I mentioned before. You'll see that a lot with very good players. They will take a less valuable piece like this bishop, line it up on the more valuable rook, even though there's a pawn and a knight in between. If all of a sudden pieces start trading and flying off the board, you never know when a line will open up on that rook. So the game continues with pawn pushing forward, the best move according to the computer, and black is starting to lose his advantage. It's still at about half a pawn advantage to black at this point. So capture, the best move. And what do you think Larsen will do here? Well, hopefully you guessed, to capture with the pawn towards the center, and not the rook or the knight. If the knight would have captured, then this pawn would have been unprotected. The rook could have snatched it. So queen steps forward, creating a battery of bishop and queen, maybe with an idea of pushing the bishop here and trying to trade off the fianchettoed bishop, causing light squared weaknesses around the king. So that's a possibility for black in the future. Also, the queen stepping forward connects the rooks. Rooks connected kind of back each other up, and it gives the rooks more room to maneuver on the back rank here if they have to. So we have the pawn push on the queen side by Larsen, attacking the knight. And here, Geller responds by retreating the knight, an inaccuracy according to the computer, and now the game is about even. Just 0.01 advantage to white according to the computer's calculations. What was recommended? Well, just pushing forward. The knight would be on the edge of the board, but maybe it would lock down or close up the A file. This pawn could push forward. Later, the knight could drop back and remaneuver. And in the meantime, maybe the rooks could line up on the A file and try and go after that open A file. And now we have E3 by Bent Larsen. So if you were looking, hopefully you guessed that one. Let me know in the comments if I need to give you more time in these before I make the move and you didn't have enough time to figure it out or guess what you wanted to look at. Anyway, let's see here. We have E3 attacking the center here. How will his opponent respond? By capturing. Computer says that's not the best move. Apparently, bishop to c5 is preferred. And there is that saying, to take is a mistake. A lot of times it's good to just leave the tension in the center. Just improve your position, back up the center, and that's what this bishop move would have done. But instead, Geller captures. Now, what should Larsen do here? If you were Bent Larsen, what would you play in this position? So take a look at it. You have different options to recapture that pawn. Bishop, knight, or pawn. So let's see what Larsen does. He captures with the knight, and the best move according to the computer. And now white has a slight edge of just a quarter of a pawn advantage. So why didn't you capture with the bishop? Why the knight? Why not this pawn over here capturing towards the center? Well, that might leave a little bit more of a weakness around the king. But by bringing the knight up here, capturing with the knight, you're also targeting the bishop. So you could go after the bishop pair. Also, the knight could maybe jump up into the center in the future. So the bishop retreats. What would have been best? The computer actually liked bishop to g6. And the computer did not recommend moving down here and trying to trade off. So let's see what happens next. Bishop to b2. So maybe you got that move, maybe you didn't. Why is this a great move according to the computer? Now we have a 0.40 advantage for Larsen, so he's slowly increasing his advantage. So what did this do? Well, it lines up on the pawn here, along with this knight. So for the moment, we have two attackers, but there's also two defenders, so black is okay. And now black continues with the pawn push, targeting this pawn. It's backed up by the queen, so we have two attackers and only one defender. And so now the game continues with what move? What do you think Larsen should do next? Well, he finds the best move. And maybe you would have had a little bit of trouble finding this move. If you didn't, that's okay. It was probably a little hard to see, especially for beginners. You're probably thinking you had to do something about the tension between these two pawns, maybe capture. But this is the best move. We'll see why. rook captures is the best move because, of course, that rook was not defended. The only way to defend it is to move the queen, move the rook, out of the line of fire, or put this knight forward and back it up with the other rook. But Efim Geller captures the rook. So, hopefully you'll find out what the best move is in this position. So go ahead and guess. It looks like Larsen captures with the queen, which is best, because now we have a battery on this pawn, and the knight is attacking as well. So 3 attackers, only 2 defenders, bishop and rook here. So now we have a capture of that pawn. What do you think Larsen should do now? Well, he goes ahead and ignores that, and that can be a good piece of advice. Sometimes you want to try and ignore what your opponent is doing and instead try and influence the game with your moves. So by capturing here, Larsen influences the game by putting pressure on that queen. So immediately black has to stop with what he was doing over here on the queen side and deal with this attack on his queen. So we have the queen moving over, creating a battery, and now we have 3 pieces lined up on that knight and only 2 defenders. So what do you think Larsen would do in this position? He just drops back. Now this was the second best move. The computer actually preferred pushing the d-pawn up, helping to defend that knight and leaving the knight on that outpost. But Bent Larsen chooses to retreat back. Now Efim Geller will respond by dropping his bishop back here to e7. Now, this is an inaccuracy according to the computer. Apparently, the computer recommended the rook. So back in this position, the computer recommended the rook capture on e3, and then after the pawn captures, then, let's see, bishop takes d3, attacking the rook. So a lot of exchanges could have happened there. But if we go back, let me go back a few moves. So after this capture, the battery's created attacking that knight. The knight retreats. And now the bishop retreats. Maybe Geller was worried about bishop takes, and then the pawn would have to take, and then the queen would grab a pawn up here, breaking these pawns up. So that's probably why this bishop retreat was made. But now Larsen has time to move. What do you think Larsen should do next? Well, he plays rook to c1, an inaccuracy according to the computer, but Larsen is still ahead. Not quite half a pawn advantage at this point for white. And once again, we see that idea of taking a less valuable rook and lining it up on the more valuable queen, even though there are pieces in the middle. But now there's a threat of capturing this pawn and having a discovered attack on the queen. So Geller responds by capturing first. Excuse me. And what would you play here if you were Bent Larsen? We have d takes c4. So maybe that's an obvious move. This move captures away from the center with a pawn, and you don't usually want to do that. But it does kind of slow down and prevent black from having a passed pawn over here on b7 that can just push forward. All right, the game continues with queen to b6. And once again, the queen lining up on the more valuable king here. Even though there are pieces in between, you never know when things will open up. Okay. Larsen's move. What do you think he should play here? Well, he finds the best move, and hopefully you did too. He places his knight on this outpost, attacking the queen. And how does his opponent respond? Well, we have a capture. If a great knight is on an outpost on your side of the board, usually you want to get rid of that thing. So the knight captures, and guess the move. It's probably obvious here. But let's see what Larsen does. Yes, he just recaptures. The best move. And at this point, material is even, but the computer evaluates Larsen as being 3/4 of a pawn ahead at this point. If we look at the position, we have 3 pawns versus 3 on the king side. Larsen has a passed pawn, up to the 5th rank. His opponent has a passed pawn, but it hasn't gone anywhere yet. We have this battery lined up here. So there's a threat right here of capturing this pawn on g7. So how do you think the opponent will respond? We have this inaccuracy, retreating the bishop. Now, this bishop is really blocked in here. The computer says the best move would have been to push the pawn to try and blunt the scope of the bishop along that diagonal. So this is a kind of a passive defensive move here. The computer doesn't like that, saying that now Larsen has the equivalent of a 1-pawn advantage, even though material is even. So the game continues with what now? What do you think Larsen should do next? He jumps forward with the bishop, attacking the queen. Now the computer says it would have been better to place the knight on d4, but by moving here with the bishop, it does attack your opponent's queen, forcing them to do something about that. And the bishop is a little more centralized here. So the queen jumps forward to b3, the best move in the position, according to the computer. But 3/4 of a pawn advantage still for white. The game continues with knight centralizing. Hopefully you found that. Here the computer actually recommended retreating the knight back and attacking the queen again. All right. The pawn is moving finally. Now the computer doesn't like this, saying that this is an outright mistake here, pushing this pawn. We can guess that Efim Geller wanted to get his passed pawn moving, as his opponent's passed pawn is up here on the 5th rank already. What was recommended? The immediate f6. That is what the computer says that Efim Geller should have played, attacking the knight, blocking the scope of this battery aimed at g7. And now what? What does Bent Larsen do here? So we're starting to get into the more exciting part of the game. And as I mentioned, this game transposed. It started as a King's Fianchetto opening, then it went to a King's Indian attack, and it ended up with the ready opening, ready gambit declined advanced variation. So that's kind of interesting how the game's transposed through different openings. All right. The move. Great move by Geller. And now we're going to see a little bit of the sacrifice that I was talking about in the game. So, the title of the video is Chess Sacrifice. Or excuse me, not the title, but the thumbnail says Chess Sacrifice. So let's see it here. We just had knight to d7, targeting the bishop. If that is captured, then this pawn could be captured, and then maybe this one next. So what should Geller do here? He counterattacks. And this is a mistake according to the computer. So we have an attack on the more valuable rook. Now, sacrifices can take many forms. I had a very good point brought up by a viewer. When there is a sacrifice offered, you don't have to take it. So remember that. Just because there is a sacrifice, you don't have to accept the sacrifice. Your opponent doesn't have to accept the sacrifice. And that was a very important point brought up by one of the viewers. So we have a rook under attack here, a more valuable piece. What should Geller do? What do you think he would do? And what would you do in this position? Well, let's find out. A brilliant move played by Bent Larsen. If you didn't find this move, that's okay, because there's a lot going on here. You may have thought that the rook was under attack and you have to move it by, maybe attacking the queen, something like that, and then going after the bishop. But the best move is found by Larsen, this brilliant move. So bishop captures the pawn, breaking open the protection around the king. The rook is able to be captured here. And here, according to the computer, it is best to just accept this sacrifice. And is it a sacrifice? Kind of. If you leave a more valuable piece where it can be captured, that's sacrificing material. You're going down in material, basically. So should this sacrifice be accepted? Yes, according to the computer, and it is captured. So now what do you think Bent Larsen should do? The obvious move might be to recapture after one of your pieces are taken, but then this would be no longer protected by the queen. So what is played here? The best move is played by Bent Larsen. A great move according to the computer. And now white has a +3 advantage here. So a full piece advantage according to the computer, even though he's +4 ahead at the moment. Now, what would you do as Geller here? You're in check. This bishop is offered up as a sacrifice. Now, sometimes your only option is to accept the sacrifice, like here, because the bishop is cutting off the king from doing anything other than capturing the bishop, because the king is in check by the knight. So, of course, the sacrifice is accepted. It's also forced. We have a capture. Now the queen is lined up on that king. What should be done now with this huge advantage by Bent Larsen? It says he has a +7 advantage, even though the computer says it is a +3 advantage. So the game continues with knight takes e8 with check, the best move in the position. Remember to always look for checks, captures, and threats in that order. Checks first because they're most forcing. So now we have a check, and this is a double discovered check, which those are very dangerous, because when that happens, when a king is in check, there are 3 options: capture the checking piece, block the checking piece, or just run. But when you have a double discovered check, both pieces are checking the king at the same time, and that means the only option for the king is to run, to move to another square. And if that's not possible, then it's checkmate. So we have the king running, attacking the knight here. What should Larsen do here? What do you think he did? What would you do? He brings the queen up with check, and the attack continues. The king runs out. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have given you that answer so soon. There is another option of blocking with the bishop, and apparently that's the best move, to block with the bishop. But Geller thought that was even more dangerous. So he runs towards the center, and now he's protecting the knight here. And the game continues with what? What should Larsen do next? We have a pawn check. The best move, according to the computer. So let's finish this out. The king is in check. The king continues to run to d7, the best move, apparently. Keeping an eye on this knight in case the queen captures bishop. Well, then king could capture the knight. This also is keeping the passed pawn blocked and protecting his own knight. So, Larsen's turn. What next? The best move. Another great move by Larsen. Dropping the knight back, checking the king. And here, the best move would have been to just go ahead and take that passed pawn. But that didn't happen. Instead, the king runs, pinning his knight to the queen. So, not the best move. And now Larsen's turn. What do you think he does? Well, let's find out. Bishop to h3, the best move. Bringing in another piece into this attack. And it's really looking bad because the king is defending the knight here. But because of that bishop, the king is going to have to run, and then that knight will no longer be defended. So the king runs, and now what? What do you think Larsen does? Well, he captures the knight, of course, that wasn't protected, and now the queen is threatening to maybe move here to c7 and check the king, or here, or the bishop could move up there to c8. So it's just looking really bad for Black's king here. And the final moves of the game, we have queen delivering a check, but it's already too late. After this move, it is +6 for white, even though the material is only +1. As far as material, it's a +1 advantage at the moment. So let's look at that. Larsen is just ahead by 1 pawn. But the attack is so dangerous. What do you think Larsen does? Well, he just runs his king forward here. And now we have bishop dropping back here to the center, getting out of the line of attack by that knight. But apparently the best move would have been queen to c2. Moving the queen here, preventing attacks and checks by the queen or the bishop here. But that would have allowed this knight to possibly just pick off the bishop. So that's probably why that bishop was moved. But now it's really too late. Because of that, there's a mate in 4. So see if you can figure out the mate in 4. All right, here we go. The first move, check with the bishop. So that was the move that you need to make for the quickest possible mate here. So check, mate in 3 now. The king runs, and the best thing to do would be what? King to a8 is the way to put up the most resistance, and that's what our opponent does. So here, there are a lot of options for mate in 3. But Larsen chooses a5 check. And this is where the opponent resigned. Now, if you don't know how the mate, there's a mate in 2 here. So basically, the only option is for the king to move over to b8. But then you have queen to c7. The king would have to move back to the corner. And then the queen could just move to b7, mating the opponent's king in the corner here. All right. Before I go, I want to put up the computer review here and see what score they give. Check this out. The accuracy rating here for Bent Larsen was 97.1% accuracy. Oh, I might have to move my image. Hold on. I'll minimize my picture. That giant. It kind of stretched my picture up into I don't know, a crazy distortion here. So let me minimize that down. Oh, I messed it up. Okay. Anyway, I'll fix that later. Okay, let me drop my picture down to the bottom of the screen so you can see a little bit here. Let me flatten down real small here so you can see even more. Okay, so you can see more of this here. 97.1% accuracy by Bent Larsen, which is pretty awesome. 82.7 by his opponent. But Larsen had one brilliant move and 5 great moves. Any bad moves here? There were 5 inaccuracies by Larsen, but 4 by his opponent and 2 mistakes. And also, if you can see this, 2800 level is what Larsen played at, 2200 by his opponent. And it looks like 96.2% accuracy in the opening for Larsen, 95.4% by his opponent. So they both did pretty good in the opening. But the middle game, 96.2% by Larsen and 83.8% by his opponent. 100% endgame accuracy for Larsen and only 58.2% for his opponent. So outstanding game by Larsen there. Again, he said that was probably his best or one of his best games. It was kind of tricky there at the ending. When you have sacrifices, a lot of times it's difficult to kind of calculate everything out and figure that out. So I would definitely recommend practicing, puzzles. I'll have some more sacrifice puzzle videos in the future that can help with that. But in the meantime, feel free to leave comments, like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.